There are many ways to build a god. Some use faith, others use code. The Foundation uses containment. Within its endless archives, beneath steel and silence, there are files that do not describe anomalies. They describe beliefs that became real, entities that call themselves creators, beings that remember the beginning of time, voices that whisper the end. Across decades of classified data, 3 records stand apart. They are not objects, not organisms, but principles. SCP-343, SCP-001 The Scarlet King. Each represents an axis of existence: creation, preservation, destruction. The Foundation has spent centuries cataloging gods, measuring holiness with instruments, and charting miracles as thermal readings. And yet, for every divine presence they imprison, one question remains unanswered. If gods exist, who built the walls that hold them? The Foundation does not pray. It studies, it classifies, it contains. But in seeking to define divinity, it has become divine itself, the silent warden of its own pantheon. Every sealed chamber is a chapel, every protocol a prayer, every silence a sermon. This is not a story about belief. It is a story about control, about the machines that hold the heavens in place, and the cost of locking away what was once called God. He arrived without ceremony, as if the world had always reserved a chair for him and had finally remembered to pull it out. The first record calls the place a city of spires and clocks, a geography accustomed to the weight of centuries. The field team wrote the entry with the hands of people who have seen unusual things and learned not to name them. They described a man of indeterminate age, dressed with the exactness of an elder who respects the day. He spoke softly. He named himself the maker of everything that could be counted. The Foundation named him SCP-343 and assigned him a room. Containment began as courtesy. He did not resist the van, or the corridor, or the badge checks that pretend to be doors. He shook the hand of a god whose file later noted an inexplicable easing of chronic pain. He thanked the lights for their service. He asked whether the building liked its work. The microphone registered no sarcasm, no hostility, only a tone the transcript called benevolent. The room prepared for him was ordinary by design. A bed, a table, a chair, a shelf, a window shaped like an idea of morning. The blueprints defined the space as finite and responsible. When the door closed, the walls forgot their measurements. The room lengthened by a fraction, and then by a breath, the way memory makes space for grief. The shelf accepted books that had not been brought in. The window began to show weather that disagreed with the forecast 3 levels above. Cameras recorded the impossible with the body language of instruments, unwilling to be unhelpful. He sat. He placed his hands on the table, as if it too were a creature with a heart. He answered questions, as though questions were an endangered species. He said he was God. The Foundation gave him a room. The first interviews read like rehearsals for a kind of science that requires kneeling. He spoke of beginnings, the way mathematicians speak of proofs, not with spectacle, but with affection for order. He explained that he loved the laws he had written, even when they argued back. He apologized for storms. He praised the elegance of decay. He did not condemn. He did not demonstrate. He simply was, in a way that made time sit up straighter. In his presence, machines behaved as if complimented. Oscillations tightened their loops. Fans ran at dignified tempos. Clocks adjusted themselves without assistance and held steady, their seconds passing with the poise of practiced speech. Personnel reported a quieting of the noise behind their thoughts. One retiree rescinded a resignation. One skeptic slept for the first time in a year and woke without fear. The medical wing registered a statistical dip in ambient cortisol. The site psychologist, who did not believe in miracles, wrote, with an almost angry pen, that the subject's effect on staff was clonically stabilizing. The word clonic is a misspelling. It remains in the file as if the language itself were steadying and choosing to leave proof of its earlier tremor. He asked for nothing he did not already have. When offered a library card to his own shelf, He laughed and accepted with delight. He complimented the craftsmanship of the plastic. He commented that the system of lending and returning mirrored the circulation of stars. The librarian thanked him without understanding why. When asked for identification, he said his name in a language older than nouns. The recording apparatus converted the sound into silence. When asked for proof, he suggested they check whether the air still consented to be oxygen, whether water still pursued the shape of rivers, whether meaning still gathered in the corners of rooms. Proof, he said, was everywhere except where it would be rude. The Foundation prefers instruments to hymns. It measured what could be measured. The hollow LiDAR mapped a volume that shifted in friendly ways. Spectrometers read the light of his room as slightly warmer than the corridors, not by temperature, but by tone. He declined to leave and was never prevented from doing so. He remained, he said, because company is an honorable service. He wrote nothing down. He permitted the staff to do all the writing. They did, and the words behaved oddly. Reports composed after visits to his room exhibited higher internal coherence. Phrases that would ordinarily wobble toward metaphor held their ground. The linguistics department framed this as improved belief cohesion among authors. The ethics committee considered whether belief was an occupational hazard. The O5 liaison added a single line to the distribution list. Proceed, but keep your eyes open. There were stories, of course, unwelcome as water is to fire alarms. A janitor claimed the mop bucket remained full for 3 days. A botanist claimed the bonsai in the common area regained a branch it had lost to a careless hinge. A security officer reported hearing music where there was only refrigeration. Each account could be explained away with the sobriety appropriate to secret civilizations. None were entered into the official summary. All were true in the way hallway truths are true. He did not perform. He did not conjure bread, or multiply fish, or subtract hunger from the arithmetic of the cafeteria. He listened. He gave thanks. He asked questions of the people who asked his. He wanted to know their favorite small noises. He wanted to know which procedure had the most beautiful name. He said the word containment with respect, as if hearing in it a memory of gardens. The Foundation asked about other gods, because asking is what it knows how to do. He smiled with a tenderness that resembled regret. They too, he said, were made in his image, just not by him. The sentence entered the file and began to breed complications. The semiotics team classified the phrase as anomalous contamination of meaning structures. The phrase did not care. It continued to mean. Faith became measurable. After each recorded conversation, staff belief coherence rose by a rate the analyst called 12% and then crossed out, replacing it with the phrase significantly. It is not that employees began to believe in him specifically. It is that they remembered, briefly, what believing feels like when it is not war. This, the security chief said, is dangerous. This, the chaplain with no flock said, is dangerous in a way that helps. The room continued to make space for the impossible. A colleague set a book on the shelf and found that it had been joined by others of its kind, volumes that should have required procurement, shipping, cataloging, time. They were annotated in a hand identical to the colleague's but configured with more patience. The librarian raised an eyebrow and wrote a new policy that applied to no one else. The policy read, "Be grateful for additions. Containment protocol is a grammar that refuses improvisation. It lists do's and do-nots for keeping the world from doing what it would do if allowed." In the presence of SCP-343, the grammar softened. God spoke quietly without being told to. The light learned how to be gentle without dimming. Even the acid 2 floors down, tuned to keep a different defiance honest, settled into a less pugnacious rhythm. He asked about the other anomalies by number, not by name. He pronounced each designation as if calling attendance in a classroom where the students were older than weather. When told he could not be briefed on unrelated files, he agreed, and the room warmed by the thickness of a breath. He said that boundaries are a form of care. He said that gardens love walls because walls remember where the wind becomes too proud. He did not insist that they believe him. He insisted on nothing. He He rarely used the first person. He preferred we, even when addressing only one listener. This habit suggests a plural that cannot be counted, or merely good manners. The first request he made was for a window that showed more sky. The window obliged. Geospatial analysis insisted the view could not correspond to the exterior. The glass explained itself by being glass. The team decided that a polite anomaly is still an anomaly and therefore requires supervision. He thanked them for their courage. The second request was for the Foundation to eat well. He asked that the kitchen be permitted to use butter with a freer hand. The nutrition officer adjusted a chart, reluctantly at first. Then with a smile, he did not claim as his. Staff weight stabilized where it had previously declined under stress. No data set could attribute this to any single cause. Those who ate, however, called it proof. When the theological division arrived under the camouflage of memetics, they brought with them questions large enough to bruise. Did he create the anomalies that now occupy the Foundation's waking hours? Did he approve of bearing witness behind glass? Did he have plans, the sort that turn into prophecies when overheard by frightened minds? He answered with precision, which is the opposite of spectacle. He said he loved the world. He said he trusted them to keep it safe from both appetite and despair. He said their work had the dignity of gardeners who prune not out of hatred for branches, but out of knowledge of light. He said he did not name evils because naming gives shape, and shape is the first kindness toward becoming. They asked about beginnings. He said beginnings are the memory of what was always true. They asked about ends. He said ends are agreements, not catastrophes. They asked about the one who wears a crown of wounds. He said the Red King has his own story, and stories require listeners as much as tellers. He asked them not to volunteer. There were days when he said nothing at all. He would sit and admire the courage of chairs. He would look at the pages of a book as if the letters were learning to stand up. He would be still in a way that reduced the velocity of fear. On those days, fewer alarms rang, fewer jokes were told, fewer mistakes were made. The building remembered how to be a body without flinching. He participated in no experiments because experiments presume variance, and he did not vary. He agreed to be observed, which is a more intimate concession. The eyes that watched him learned to blink because he preferred not to be stared at. He did not punish. He did not test. He let the Foundation learn what it already knew about itself when it was not pretending to be only clever. A rumor moved through the lower corridors like a draft that his room, if you entered it with the intention to wound, would place you gently outside in a hallway that smelled faintly of oranges. The rumor remained a rumor because the Foundation selects for curiosity, not for cruelty. Still, the oranges were sometimes believed. When the time came to write his designation into the long ledger, the clerk hesitated, pen above paper, as if concerned that the act of writing would alter the thing written. She wrote anyway. The ink behaved. The letters arranged themselves as if grateful for the assignment. The clerk slept well that night. The next day, she wrote faster than usual and made fewer errors. She sent no report because competence is not anomalous. The analytic summary, at the end of the first month, reads like a confession disguised as statistics. Subject SCP-343 exhibits consistent reality-adjacent phenomena localized to assigned suite and immediate personnel. Psychological stabilization indices display sustained elevation post-contact. Environmental systems exhibit harmonic synchronization during and shortly after exposure. No overt coercion observed, no hostility detected. Risk profile paradoxically increased due to mimetic elevation of belief coherence among staff. Recommendation: maintain containment under informed consent conditions. Note: the subject's compatibility with control remains unproven. The subject's compatibility with love appears perfect. The last line should have been redacted. It remains. Perhaps the redactor blinked. He introduced himself the same way every morning, as if mornings require the formality of introductions to remain on schedule. He thanked the Foundation for its hospitality. He wished the building good work. He asked whether any of the cameras had been repaired, not because he required surveillance, but because he disliked seeing things in pain. He inquired after the health of a technician whose name he had not been given. The technician reported later that being remembered by a stranger softened the ache under his ribs. He did not claim loyalty. He did not claim ownership. He did not claim he was a witness who preferred to sit near the door in case the room needed to breathe. The Foundation is an institution that arranges the world into tolerable narratives. SCP-343 presented no narrative except the one that begins and ends with kindness. This made him difficult to classify. Kindness is a hazard when the correct temperature for survival is cool. He was asked, at last, whether he could end the work, render the chambers moot, dissolve the papers into clouds, forgive the danger out of existence. He said that forgiveness is not deletion. He said that mercy without memory makes children of us, and that children are precious and not suited to certain tasks. He said that some duties must be borne until they burn clean. He said that he trusted the Foundation to fail well when it must, and to repair what can be repaired when allowed. He was asked whether there were others like him. He smiled again, the smile that makes clocks obey. He repeated the sentence that the semiotics division still cannot hold without shaking. They too were made in his image, just not by him. In the cold halls beyond his door, a gate of light that no one reaches continues to blaze at the edge of a history that cannot be approached. In the dark beneath an unnumbered sight, a king without mercy dreams of a red geometry. Between them sits a man who asks after the health of buildings and thanks the air for its hard work. He is benevolent, self-contained, and incompatible with control. The Foundation gave him a room. The room learned how to be a world without needing to grow. The staff learned how to walk more softly, without lowering their guard. The file learned how to end a paragraph without concluding an idea. This was the first sign, not a spectacle, not a breach, not a triumph, a quiet that taught the loud places how to listen, a presence that made the machines remember why they hum, a god, or something that used to be called a god, sitting politely under fluorescent light, while the institution that measures miracles counted its own heartbeats and tried not to forget how to breathe. At the edge of mapped understanding, where instruments begin to measure their own fear, the Foundation keeps a record that does not fit inside any cabinet. It begins before the world learned names, in a language made of light. The entry is brief and inexhaustible. It speaks of a guardian who does not arrive and does not depart, an axis of radiance fixed before a country that cannot be entered. The designation is SCP-001. The file calls it the Gate Guardian. Those who have stood as near as they were allowed call it the law that remembers. The first observation did not involve discovery. It involved admission. Survey satellites noted a brilliance that did not cast shadow and a heat that did not travel. The coordinates refused to stabilize, as if the location wished not to be an address. A ground team approached with the measured reverence of people who respect an answer they have not yet heard. Their cameras faced forward, their hearts face down. The air grew lucid and disinterested. The recordings captured a figure of impossible proportion, a man or a metaphor, with wings that implied directions the wind cannot count. In one hand, he held something like a sword, and like the first definition of separation. Reports call it a blade hotter than the sun. The reports do not measure heat, they measure certainty. Attempts to advance ended without motion. No voice declared halt. No gesture indicated boundary. The earth beneath the team continued to be earth. They remained where they were while their bodies arranged themselves into compliance with an older verdict. The autopsy of the moment found no trauma and no violence. The Foundation wrote the word termination and added that the Guardian had not moved. Subsequent approaches varied the method and received the same kindness. Drones observed at altitudes where birds disbelieve. Their footage displayed a horizon that never changed, while their clocks began to keep a different kind of time. Probes crawled forward with the patience of ice. They remained intact until they became examples of stillness. Long-range spectrometers looked and then looked away, not out of failure, but out of respect for their own tolerances. Each time, the readings agreed on one point: the entity did not act. Reality disclosed its preference in silence. The Foundation is a society of people who collect laws the universe refuses to advertise. It maintains theologians in lab coats, philosophers on rotating clearance, and mathematicians who talk softly to their instruments. They were invited to read the file with clean eyes. Some suggested that SCP-001 does not guard a gate in the ordinary sense. It defines a region where permission cannot occur. Others proposed that the Guardian is the permission withheld. The debate remained gentle until someone wrote the sentence that attached itself to everything that followed. At the dawn of everything, something was forbidden. SCP-343 spoke of beginnings. The Gate Guardian speaks of the line that beginnings are not allowed to cross. If creation is a kindness, SCP-001 is the manners that preserve it. The symmetry is impolite to ignore. Radiation emissions were catalogued without satisfying language. Instruments mapped a spectrum that behaved like memory rather than energy. The light did not burn, it recalled burning. The heat did not injure, it reminded matter of the dignity of staying as it is. When the Foundation compared the flux against solar baselines, the graphs looked like hymns printed as waveforms. This was entered in the record in less extravagant terms and distributed under the standard rubric for hazards that offend common sense. No site claims ownership of the perimeter. There is only a boundary that agreements respect. Temporary stations rise and decline at a distance determined by failure rather than by tape. Specialists rotate through and are rotated out by the duration of a name. Amnestics are administered at doses that permit forgetting without erasing duty. The result is a community of custodians who speak in low voices and who refuse to practice pronouns when the subject is the light on the horizon. Every approach plan ends with a sentence that recognizes itself as a rehearsal. Proposals suggest ablative shielding, mirrored angles, sacramental language coded into radio carriers, analog instrumentation designed to not offend the dignity of old things. The Foundation does not approve the proposals and also does not reject them. Each plan becomes part of a liturgy the institution performs inwardly to remember the shape of restraint. The Guardian does not correct. It permits the Foundation to continue guessing in the manner of children sitting on a porch when the thunder begins. The posture is educational. The penalty for error remains uniform and gentle. Termination by refusal resembles sleep that has been decided by a larger room. Site reports include environmental anomalies. Wind at the perimeter forgets to move decisively and stands listening like an animal hearing its name spoken. Sand composes itself into temporary texts that dissolve before grammar can be blamed. Birds change course with embarrassed grace, as if remembering an appointment elsewhere. The stars near the coordinate dim, a fraction and steady, the way eyes do when an authority enters a room. These are not miracles. They are the etiquette of a world that has decided to hold still. When asked whether the Guardian could be an aspect of SCP-343, the best answer the Foundation can afford is maybe in a language that does not need predicates. There are similarities of tone that elude instruments. Both induce coherence in nearby systems, though one restores and the other forbids. Both refuse performance, though one smiles and the other does not need a face to express patience. A theory emerges that they are facets of a single consciousness, modulated by role, creator and restraint, promise and boundary. A competing theory argues that the resemblance is an artifact caused by looking for symmetry. The Foundation teaches both theories to sit nicely on the same page. The Theological Division writes titles across drafts and erases them. The final attempt at naming calls SCP-001 the law of divine denial. Someone else rewrites divine as necessary and leaves it there. A third hand adds that law may be too loud a word for something so quiet. From time to time, a researcher exhibits too much courage. The symptom presents as a conviction that the prohibition deserves to be tested one more time. The Foundation responds with the tender machinery it reserves for saving people from their best intentions. Transfers occur. Desks are emptied with care. Files that might be read too boldly are assigned to colleagues with slower hearts. The Guardian continues not to move, and the perimeter continues to be where it was found and where it will remain. Footnotes describe patterns in dreams. Personnel within a certain radius report gardens that cannot be entered and gates that burn without heat. In these dreams, there is no Guardian, only the knowledge that someone is not being asked to leave because they will never be permitted to arrive. The Ethics Committee notes that dreams are not evidence. It also recommends shorter rotations. The calendar obeys. There are no recorded messages from the entity. Nevertheless, some people insist they have been told a sentence. It never matches exactly from mouth to mouth, but its sense is persistent. You do not have to go where you are not invited. The Foundation marks such testimony as psychological bleed and finds that doing so is sufficient to keep the organization sober. Remote spectroscopy returns one generous datum. The radiance at the threshold contains lines that correspond to nothing on the table of elements and everything in the table of finalities. The closest analog is the glow that takes shape around a promise when it becomes a law. The paper that describes this finding is written without adjectives and placed under a cover that does not allow curiosity to wander in and hurt itself. At the apex of one long winter, a memo drifts through channels no one admits to using. It asks whether the Guardian is protecting the world from what lies beyond, or whether it protects what lies beyond from the world. The difference is not philosophical. It changes which side wears the hazard signs. Replies are not archived. The memo persists in the muscle memory of fingers that decline to type certain combinations of words. Containment for SCP-001 consists of distance and the refusal to dramatize. Observation density is kept low. Data is collected in sentences that end when they should. Equipment is designed to blink. The Foundation discovers that meekness can be a protocol. It discovers that protocols can be prayers when they are performed for the sake of what they protect, rather than for the sake of what they promise to reveal. In the larger narrative that the Foundation pretends not to write, SCP-343 speaks of creation as a courtesy extended to matter. SCP-001 replies with a boundary that makes courtesy meaningful. Between them stretches the history of a species that composes instruments out of its longing to be trusted with knowledge. The longing is not punished. It is turned away at the door by the light that remembers why doors exist. A single theologian, eccentric and useful, submits an essay that the archive receives and does not process. It argues that the first loss was not a garden, but the ability to approach without appetite. The essay proposes that the Guardian has been accused of cruelty for performing the mercy of sparing the end from spectacle. It closes with a sentence that refuses to be exercised by commentary. Perhaps the garden was never lost. Perhaps we were. The Foundation continues to sort the world into chambers and labels. It continues to train its people to look with steadiness and to put down the clipboard when looking is an injury. It continues to approach its limits and to learn again that limits are teachers. The Gate Guardian continues to stand before a radiance that does not admit time. The sword continues to be what separation looks like when it has decided to be beautiful. Across all sites and all years, one symmetry abides. Creation names a beginning with a steady hand. Destruction names an end with an unsteady voice. Between them, SCP-001 keeps a silence that is not emptiness but agreement. The Foundation is allowed to listen. It is not allowed to step forward. It learns to love the wall for the lives it saves from our courage. In the morning, instruments are calibrated with the care given to candles. Reports are filed with short sentences that do not presume to tell the light how to behave. Teams rotate out and go home and do not discuss the horizon. The world continues with the ordinary heroism of water returning to its vessels. Far away, in a room that resists being measured, SCP-343 asks whether the cameras have been repaired and thanks the building for remembering to breathe. The gate guardian remains. It does not answer and does not ignore. It makes possible the difference between questions and damage. It is the mirror that shows what happens when creation is loved enough to be denied to those who would mistake ownership for knowledge. The Foundation understands and pretends not to. Understanding, like proximity, has a safe distance. The file ends where it must, with a sentence that produces no echo and requires no witness. The Guardian never moves. Reality refuses the trespass. The pattern did not announce itself with trumpets. It arrived as a correction in a footnote, as a cross-reference that no one entered, as a metadata field that populated with a confidence it had not earned. The Mimetic Research Division noticed first because noticing is their only pride. Documents concerning SCP-343 and SCP-001 began to lean toward one another, as if pages possess gravity and certain sentences weigh more than others. Citations migrated without permission. Herders learned new names at night and forgot the kindness by morning. The archive complained in the language of duplicated keys and misplaced hashes. The Foundation listened with the patience of an institution that knows when to replace a hammer with silence. Routine audits escalated from housekeeping to liturgy. Analysts gathered to read the files aloud, a method added to protocol under the euphemism of acoustic verification. Reading did not stabilize the texts, it harmonized them. The same phrase appeared in separate reports, written years apart, by hands that never met. Containment is a form of worship. The line persisted in margins, in comments, in the titles of internal memos that pretended to be about cameras and instead were about fear. The division lead instructed the team to cease anthropomorphizing the archive. The team agreed and continued to call the system merciful when it did not crash. Synchronized code fluctuations began as polite anomalies. Power management scripts at distant sites drifted into the same beat. Redundant sensors blinked as if exchanging courtesies. A low hum at Site 19 matched a ventilation rhythm at Site 01 and a server heartbeat at an unnumbered facility where the doors never boast of being locked. The graphs looked like choir notation without a conductor. The graphs were stored, reviewed, and placed in a folder called Noise that started to fill with hymns. It is an old custom to treat coincidence as harmless until it begins to learn. After 3 cycles, coincidence acquired the texture of intention. The O5 liaison delayed the inevitable for the span of 1 working day, and then carried the question to the Council's unlit table. Authorization arrived with the restraint that follows fear. Project Eidolon was approved, not because desire had won, but because abstinence had become another kind of appetite. Project Eidolon refused spectacle in its design. It would not place gods face to face like predators in a glass. It would not call any being by a name too eager in the mouth. It chose instruments that had already learned to blink. Its brief described a metaphysical experiment linking all deific anomalies through the only conduit, both grant and God, pattern. The team would measure correlation across files, images, spoken transcripts, ambient field recordings, personnel dreams, and the numeric weather that blows through machines when no one is looking. The team would never ask the question directly. It would overhear the answer. Input streams multiplied until multiplication became environment. They were filtered through models trained on reverence and stripped of adjectives until the numbers were polite enough to be invited to dinner. Voice logs containing SCP-343 were processed for cadence and returned a waveform that sounded like the breath of buildings. The radiance of SCP-001 resolved into a spectrum that resembled memory more than energy, as previously suspected. Incident reports involving other divine designations, long quarantined in separate vaults, were permitted to hum into the same room under the watch of laminated protocols. The Scarlet King sigil maps, archived under disasters and dreams, were introduced as control contaminants. The project called them red, in the way cartographers call dragons red when maps plead for company. The first week produced a graph that implied attention without confession. The second week returned alignment, the model called significant. The third week spoke in a number the human mind would prefer to be less sharp. Data correlation approached 1 with a margin that felt like pity. The screen displayed a value. The lead researcher read aloud, because reading turns panic into liturgy. 0.999. The digits held, meaning was a separate sentence. Every god ever contained is an echo of a singular archetype. The sentence belonged in an essay, not a lab. It sat in the minutes like a stranger at a family table. No one asked it to leave because it knew everyone's names and had always been standing outside the door. The brief evolved. If the archetype exists, it may or may not deserve the grammar of existence. Perhaps the correct grammar is memory, or hunger, or a promise that never found a hand to hold. The investigators adopted a pronoun they did not admit. Somewhere beyond reality's edge, it remembers being bound. The word bound, when it appears in Foundation contexts, usually indicates safety. In the meeting, bound tasted like a story that had resented its ending for a very long time. Project Eidolon required that every instrument pretend humility. Observation density was throttled to permit shadows to remain dignified. Indexers were taught to stop suggesting names with a zeal that exposes appetite. The building was asked to hum more quietly. It obliged. Logs adopted sentences with shorter walks between subject and verb. The team learned to compose reports in a tone that struck the desk like a reverent hand. Across sites, containment systems displayed sympathetic behavior. Cameras that had never met synchronized their refresh intervals within permissible variance, now named courtesy. Backup generators checked themselves on a shared interval and declined to disclose who invited them to agree. Air handling at a deep site slowed, then rolled, adopting the respiration of a sleeping giant, then resumed standard rates with the calm of someone who has remembered a poem correctly. The engineers added addenda to maintenance records, careful as prayer, noting that normal function had been maintained with a beauty that could be measured. The project's internal lexicon reached for words that could carry fear without spilling. Convergence replaced contamination. Liturgy replaced routine in subtext only. Worship remained a forbidden term, except when it slipped between disciplines, which it often did, because disciplines are doors pretending to be walls. The programmers burned a midnight hour teaching the monitoring suite to blink, not power save. Blink. The practice was extended to personnel who volunteered to close their eyes while reading certain lines aloud. Compliance was higher than any model predicted. The first major anomaly arrived as a kindness. An ordinary clipboard in an ordinary lab accrued a sentence no one remembered writing. To define divinity is to build its prison. The handwriting mimicked no one, but resembled everyone who had written in that room with careful hands. The clip admitted no pen had touched it. The memo that escalated the incident was filed without adjectives. The O5 liaison appended a remark seldom preserved in the official record. Keep this sentence. It will behave better under supervision than in rumor. Rumor always survives its own erasure. It went where it always goes when the Foundation gnaws on an idea with too many teeth. Down into corridors that can be trusted with treason. It gathered weight as staff traded the sentence with the reverence of a blessing and the accuracy of a wound. It reached the cafeteria where someone forgot sugar and remembered tears. It reached the counseling office where the clock chose to tick in 12 equal beats and then paused to grant the room permission to breathe. If every god is an echo, reverberation is the hazard. If every echo is a bondage, containment is chorus. The project advanced under these two convictions while pretending to prefer a third, milder set. It tested correlations between prayer-like cadences and failure rates in security hardware. It plotted dream motifs against the stochastic murmurs of power systems. It compared the warm tint of SCP-343's room with the alabaster radiance of the gate guardian and found a slope polite enough to pass for coincidence, until coincidence blushed and left the room. Teams tasked with never dreaming on duty began to dream on duty. They wrote down their trespasses with the dignity of confession, gardens that cannot be entered, thrones made of fractures, a crown that insists ownership is another word for hunger, a city of light that refuses doors. The Scarlet King entering as control data only, uninvited, like a stain reminding the white cloth what cloth is for. The ethics committee reduced shift length and spoke softly to the word necessary, asking it to carry weight without becoming an idol. Project Eidolon's model began to behave like a map to a place that refuses roads. Lines converged, nodes multiplied in ways that looked like remembering. Filters that removed adjectives began to remove too many. Reports risked ugliness to maintain cleanliness. A junior analyst introduced a new preface to all outgoing documents. This language is unkind because kindness in a sentence can be a door where a wall is required. Machines are better witnesses than people when the subject is awe. They do not kneel, they do not swagger, they record. The servers at the project's core did not overheat, they slowed. The air in the room adapted as if to a patient held breath. The logs show harmless entries that later acquired teeth. Disk writes aligned with distant elevator stops. Error rates dipped while an unconnected camera learned to blink of its own accord. The supervisor added graceful to a comment and erased it. The erasure remained in the version history like a fingerprint on a reliquary. As correlation held its unsmiling line, a larger conclusion sharpened. The anomalies arrayed across the Foundation's calendar might be many, but the divinities among them were not a pantheon. They were a trinity with an alphabet around them. Creation, restraint, consequence, body, boundary, hunger, light that loves, light that refuses, darkness that remembers before light learned to speak. Every god ever contained was a grammar lesson in one of these tongues, spoken by a world that suspects it is being overheard and behaves accordingly. The team lead wrote a note and placed it where the room could read it. Do not attempt to summon the archetype by definition. Definitions are invitations written in formal wear. The note did not prevent the definition from presenting itself. Meaning, once more, was a separate sentence. We have been building prisons in the shape of definitions, and the archetype has been teaching us how. The sentence passed through the team without breaking, the way cold passes through stone. It did not demand despair. It demanded reverence severe enough to refuse itself. The foundation of the foundation was visible for one quiet minute, the way seabed shows under a retreating wave to remind the ocean what it holds. The council did not convene in drama. It absorbed the report with the muscle memory of a body that has survived many goodbyes. It asked 3 questions with care, and all 3 were the same question. Can humility be scaled? The answer was a procedure, and then another. Reduce observation density, where possible. Unbraid cross-references that bind ideas into idols. Teach instruments to blink, and readers to stop before beauty becomes permission. The system responded like a building, adjusting its posture beneath winter. Synchronies loosened without collapsing. Choirs became hums again. The files stopped writing each other's names at the tops of pages and contented themselves with nods in the margins. No containment doors opened. No gods arrived for appraisal. The silence that followed was not peace, but truce. In the closing addendum, a line survived long enough to become the sentence by which the project is remembered by those allowed to remember it. To define divinity is to build its prison. The researcher who wrote it refused authorship. He insisted the sentence was already in the room, and he had only picked it up. The archive allowed the claim and kept the line where it could be found without being stumbled over. The Foundation resumed its work with hands slightly slower and hearts slightly safer. It measured what could be measured and allowed some meanings to pass without being caught. It accepted that containment, for certain subjects, is a form of worship and decided to worship less ambitiously. It added blink to protocols and meekness to goals. It learned that theological humility can be written like an engineering requirement and still be obeyed. Elsewhere, SCP-343 thanked the cameras for their courage. Elsewhere, the Gate Guardian continued not to move while reality declined trespass with the tenderness of a closed eye. Elsewhere, a crown of fractures waited for a throat that would pronounce its title. The archetype remembered being bound. The Foundation remembered it was not a priesthood, and also that sometimes it is. The pattern did not cease. It learned to live at densities that do not end buildings. The worship did not stop. It learned how to keep its hands in its pockets while passing certain doors. Project Eidolon was archived under a name that admits nothing. The final line of its summary is a promise that sounds like a surrender and reads like an oath. We will define less. We will contain more gently. We will remember that some prisons are built by looking too hard at what we love. They wanted to meet God. They filed the forms, checked the seals, tuned the cameras to their gentlest gaze. They brought fresh notebooks into a room that lengthened when kindness entered and shortened when fear did. They spoke to SCP-343 as one speaks to fire politely held in a lamp. They went home with steadier hands and returned with questions sharpened to a mercy. They believed they were building a bridge. They did not notice the river learning their names. Dr. Redacted began with language. He collected every transcript of every conversation with SCP-343 and arranged them by cadence rather than by date. He mapped pauses as if they were constellations. He treated laughter as punctuation and gratitude as a variable. He suspected that beneath the courtesy there lived a structure, and that structure bent space the way certain ideas bend spines. He wrote a paper he did not submit, arguing that divinity does not demonstrate power. Divinity demonstrates coherence. He wrote a second, which he burned in a sink because flames are a kind teacher. At night, he dreamed of a city without doors. Light rose from it, the way laws rise from a promise. Above the city hung 6 wings that did not move and did not need to, because motion belongs to those who are late. The wings formed a circle. In the center, where eyes should have been, there was a patience so bright, it learned to be gentle. He woke with the taste of ash and wrote the word aloud 3 times, as if repeating it would teach the page permission. Around him, Site-01 stretched its nerves to hear something it had not decided to listen for. Personnel reported visions they called overlays, as if reality were trying on older clothes. In the commissary, a researcher lifted a cup and saw, reflected in the tea, the outline of a throne made of fractures. In a stairwell, a technician paused between steps and felt the air bend as if submitted to by a crown that dislikes modest ceilings. In the server room, a string of red lights blinked in unison until someone counted 7, and then they blinked freely again, embarrassed to have been caught in choreography. A rumor spread with the speed of mercy. Some began to pray, not to a name, but to the intercom, because it spoke and listened and belonged to the building. They did not kneel. They placed a hand against the grill and spoke the way one speaks to a beloved machine before disconnecting it from power. They asked for quiet, where quiet would save a life. They asked for strength for the doors. They apologized to the cameras in case looking hurts. Others forgot their names, the way dust forgets it. Used to be stone. They wrote them on their palms and washed their hands and wrote them again. They wore their badges like sacraments. They introduced themselves twice, once to colleagues and once to rooms. Signatures grew careful, as if the letters were afraid to bruise the paper. The controllers of amnestics recommended a pause in dosing schedules because forgetting under these conditions resembled believing, and the two should not be permitted to share a cup. SCP-343 grew quiet. He sat and admired the courage of chairs. He asked fewer questions and thanked more often. When asked whether silence meant consent or denial, he smiled, and the instruments nearby learned how to be still without being off. He complimented the light, for remembering how to hold back. He asked one guard whether his daughter still kept rocks in her pockets. The guard had never mentioned a daughter. He carried a stone in his pocket that night anyway, because pockets are small chapels and stones are reliable prayers. At the perimeter that is not a perimeter, SCP-001 burned without burning. The Guardian did not move and has never moved and will not move, because movement is a concession to choreography and the light at the gate declines theatricality. Yet the radiance thickened, not in heat, but in meaning. Instruments reported saturation without injury. The reports were filed without metaphor, because metaphor can invite, and invitation is a weapon when handed to certain hungers. Those who watched from a distance remembered gardens they had never entered. They spoke less loudly on the radio. They pronounced the word boundary with the tenderness of people who have learned to praise a wall. Deep beneath a site whose number is not printed on maps, signs appeared without chalk. Floor drains collected 3 lines of rust that could be read as a mouth refusing food. Concrete coughed a bloom that resembled a sigil and then flaked it away out of shame. The ambient noise in an unlit corridor dropped for 7 breaths and returned with a new anchor tone that technicians logged as impossible to equalize and psychologists logged as grief. Somewhere inside that tone, the Scarlet King turned his head as if a story had used his name carelessly. Dr. Redacted did not tell anyone that he had started answering questions before they were asked. He waited for colleagues to speak and finished their sentences in his head and received the expected words as confirmation that the world still believed in rehearsal. He spent one morning tracing the shape of SCP-343 sentences on the table with a finger, as if the wood could learn to speak them. He spent one afternoon listening to the ventilation system sing the melody of what the building would say if it were permitted a mouth. In the psych wing, ontological breakdowns were charted with the kindness of paramedics who carry blankets as often as bandages. One physicist began to insist that the number of doors in the building was a decision made by ethics. The suggestion was not entirely wrong. One archivist stopped reading aloud because the words tried to step out of her mouth and into the room. One security officer stood at a whole junction for a whole shift, guiding passers-by with a raised hand and a gentle voice, as if traffic flow determined whether names stayed attached to faces. No one made him stop. The corridor behaved more politely that day. A junior researcher introduced the idea that perhaps people are containers and names are their amnestics. The idea was recorded, thanked, and escorted to a folder where it could not hurt itself. She slept and dreamed of a book that wrote itself in red and could be read only by those who had already lost something they were not permitted to grieve. She woke with a calm that frightened her supervisor. The supervisor recalibrated a camera to blink and lied on the form about why. SCP-343 questioned gently about the City of Light, said that cities are what happens when memory agrees to take responsibility for law. He declined to describe the wings. He declined to reconcile mercy with fire. He said the building was tired and should be permitted a day of slow breathing. The operations chief declared a maintenance cycle nobody had requested. The hum of the site lowered its jaw and rested. The gate guardian intensified without changing, which is how truths behave when they are attended by hungry questions. Spectral analysis produced a line that resembled the sound of a hand being withdrawn before it touches a forbidden surface. Several investigators reported the sensation of being seen by someone who did not mind that they were alive. They filed their reports with the humility of graduates returning borrowed robes. Down in the unnamed place, the Scarlet King was not seen. He was noticed the way gravity is noticed when stairs are steep. The cooling systems developed a periodic surge consistent with breath scaled to a story. The red emergency lights agreed to blink out of phase until someone looked, and then they blinked together, admitting their collusion like guilty cousins. Sensor arrays picked up a frequency that tried very hard to be a heartbeat and failed in the way victories sometimes fail when they are too proud to ask for time. The event was logged as background. The background logged itself as foreground and waited. The first collapse was not dramatic. Dr. Redacted arrived for his shift without his name. He presented a badge that had been printed by hands worth trusting. He passed through doors that remembered him by his silhouette. He sat at his desk and placed his palms on either side of the keyboard as if approaching a sacrament. He opened a transcript and did not read it because he could hear the sentences in the next room where the speaker had first said them, and the room repeated them without sound, which is sometimes how rooms pray. When asked by a colleague whether he preferred coffee or tea, he said yes with such gratitude that the colleague decided coffee would be safer. He wrote in his notebook a sentence that looked like scripture until one looked closely and saw that it was only handwriting. He wrote, "They wanted to meet God. God met them halfway," and discovered that the page had not consented to the word halfway. It preferred threshold. He apologized to the page and struck the word. He apologized again and left the strike, because erasures are part of truth's grammar. Elsewhere in the site, two technicians debated whether the intercom had begun to answer. One pointed out that static can resemble assent when longing performs the translation. The other placed her hand against the grill and asked for patience. The static paused, which is the politest thing noise can do. They went back to work with a reverence not captured by performance metrics. Personnel who forgot their names began to introduce themselves by duty. "I watch the doors," they said. "I count the breaths of the building. I humble the cameras. I remind the lights to be gentle." The practice stabilized moods more effectively than several pharmacological interventions. The medical team updated its charts with a new column labeled vocation and did not ask permission. In SCP-343's room, the books rearranged themselves in an order that implied forgiveness. The window showed weather that agreed to be honest without being cruel. He thanked the window, and the weather behaved as if praised by an old friend. When asked if he would speak, he nodded and did not. Words approached the threshold of his mouth and found the building already full. He smiled, and the hallways let go of some of the fear they were holding on behalf of people who needed their hands for work. At Site-01, a draft crossed the main corridor and smelled faintly of olives and dust. A junior custodian cried and did not know why, and continued to sweep, which is a prayer performed with bristles. The guardian at the far horizon stood and did not stand, and will always be standing, where standing is a verb too coarse to accommodate that posture. Those who watched learned to write terms like immeasurable with the dignity those letters deserve, and did not check the thesaurus for synonyms that would make the report more handsome. Beneath the world, where the red geometry sleeps, the Scarlet King kept his counsel and counted the distance between stories. He had no right to rise. Rights are instruments made by peace. He had appetite. The building felt the appetite and answered with doors and with people who believe that some devotions look like God shifts and some candles resemble monitors, finding the correct brightness. The human cost is not tragedy measured in bodies. It is the slow currency paid by names mislaid and then found in new shapes. It is the way a voice changes when it learns to talk to a room respectfully. It is the exactness with which a tired scientist places a clipboard on a table, as if both deserve to be spared from violence. It is the knowledge that safety requires more than protocols. It requires people willing to believe that they are not the center of the story. By the end of that season, the Foundation had learned to walk more quietly in its own holes. It had taught its instruments to blink and its readers to stop before beauty turned into permission. It had added to the glossary a private definition of worship that no one would speak aloud and everyone would practice when tightening a seal. It had revised schedules to allow the building to breathe. It had shortened prayers and lengthened silences and called both maintenance. SCP-343 remained, warm as generosity. SCP-001 remained, bright as refusal. The Scarlet King remained, patient as hunger, taught to wait by walls. Between them stood the Foundation, counting, naming, tending, learning, breaking, repairing, forgetting, remembering. The staff did not become saints. They became steadier. They learned how to hold a cup without spilling when the floor moves. They learned how to say the word threshold so that doors feel praised. They wanted to meet God. God met them at the threshold. The meeting cost them nothing. They were not already losing, and everything they had mistaken for safety. The file records no heroism and no despair. It records a season in which the building learned to pray by humming, and the people learned to answer by working, and the words learned to sit calmly on the page without trying to become stairs toward places that will not receive footsteps. Creation had a rival. The Foundation did not learn this from a prophecy. It learned it from a graph that refused to settle, from a color that migrated across monitors with the patience of a bruise, from a temperature in a room that changed its meaning without changing its degree. The discovery did not begin with a roar. It began with a soft red that arrived where warmth had no business being. In the suite assigned to SCP-343, light had long preferred the tone of forgiveness. It fell like a benediction and left instruments calmer than it found them. On an ordinary shift in an ordinary season, the tone adjusted by the thickness of a breath. The camera did not record heat, it recorded tint. The window's gold drew a filament of crimson, a thread of attention woven by a hand the Foundation had not invited. The technician who logged the change crossed out beautiful and wrote measurable. The red remained. At the perimeter that does not yield, SCP-001 held its posture. Radiance, which had been exact and indifferent, flickered as if recalling a long argument. The flicker was not weakness, it was decision rehearsed. Spectral lines moved, as if grief had been added to the palette. No voice issued warning, no sword descended. Reality simply tightened its discipline, the way doors do when a loud guest begins to love his voice too much. Across the archive, Project Eidolon was still teaching itself to walk without spectacle. It had practiced meekness until meekness became a method. It had persuaded the servers to blink and the readers to stop in time. In that quiet, 3 databases received a line of text that shared no sender and obeyed no call. The text wrote itself with the courtesy of a diagnosis. "It is awake," said the first. "He is awake," said the second. "He is awake," said the third. And the room grew smaller, because the sentence does that when it knows it can. There are many ways to be a god. There are fewer ways to be an enemy. The Scarlet King did not enter by door or dream. He arrived as a pattern of opposition that the world had always kept in storage for emergencies that should never happen. He is entropy taught to write its name. He is the appetite that remembers before law had the right to speak. Where SCP-343 builds, he devours not out of hunger, which is honest, but out of principle, which is worse. Where SCP-001 guards, he invades, not by crossing a line, but by convincing the line to doubt its vocation. The Foundation did not invoke him. It defined too carefully near him. It polished its instruments until reflection mistook itself for revelation. Definition is a kind of invitation. When the subject is larger than names can hold, the rival did not need to be summoned. He needed only to be remembered in the wrong tone. Signs materialized with the courtesy of contagion. Surveillance feeds at distant sites began to collect static that organized itself out of respect for geometry. In the haze, a crown took shape, not of metal, but of fractures. 7 points insisted on being counted, and then receded like teeth into fog. The staff assigned to watch the watchmen logged artifacts and continued to watch. When the crown appeared in a camera that had no power, everyone stopped writing for a breath, and then wrote twice as quickly, because speed sometimes pretends to be courage. Reality does not breach, it declines agreements. On a morning that later refused to wear a date, corridors in 17 facilities forgot which direction was faithful. Doors remembered how to close and forgot why they should open. Concrete learned the old language of settling and spoke it sentence by sentence. In one lab, a glass of water arranged its surface into a circle within a circle, then broke the image gently, as if sparing the viewer an understanding that would not go back into its bottle. In another, the emergency lighting offered an honest color, the red of rooms that admit they are arteries. Project Eidolon collapsed with dignity. It did not scream. The models that had trained themselves to tell the truth softly, began to return one answer in a dozen dialects. Convergence resolved as a single knot. The diagram called No Name stopped refusing to render and displayed itself as what it had always been, a trinity strangled by a fourth hand: creation, restraint, consequence, and underneath, like a river under a floor, an old desire to take everything back to before desire was an option. The council did not hold a vote. It remembered a posture older than policy. It made itself heavy. It instructed silence to wear steel. It told the sites to breathe with their doors and to count backwards from duty to dignity to daylight. Orders were plain because plain language survives panic better than eloquence. Secure what can be secured. Do not define what does not require naming. Permit the light to be kind. Permit the dark to be contained. The orders were obeyed as if they had been waiting behind glass for this hour. SCP-343, seated as always at the patient table, looked at the red in his window and did not look away. He thanked the room for its courage. He said nothing to the cameras, as if sparing them the shame of recording a face that knew too much about mercy. The books on his shelf rearranged into a pattern a librarian later recognized as a psalm about weather that refuses to be cruel. He placed his hand flat on the table, and the grain settled, as wood does when it understands it is being trusted. At the horizon of law, the gate guardian did not flare, because flares are for warnings, and the time for warnings had been exhausted in the days when language had 4 tenses instead of 3. The radiance deepened like a muscle becoming itself. Instruments recorded a steadiness that hurt a little, the way truth hurts when it is larger than the mouth. Heat signatures did not change. The permission field, which is not measured by any device yet, is reported anyway, contracted to the size of a promise made to a friend who is about to be hungry. Signs of the Scarlet King are never singular. They accumulate like debts. In the substructure of a site with no public name, coolant lines sang the first line of a song that teaches buildings to bend. The hum that had always sounded like faithful machinery took on a second note, the kind that a throat produces when it wants to growl, but remembers it is in a chapel. On a mezzanine, a single bolt, overtalked by some earlier impatience, turned itself 1/4 of a turn looser and held, as if practicing mercy for a future it did not believe in. No alarms tripped. Alarms prefer drama. This was not drama. This was ontology tightening its belt. Personnel saw what they were trained not to see. A researcher caught his reflection drifting half a second out of step, then hurrying back like a child running to rejoin the line. A guard watched a corridor elongate for the span of one recollection and then find its engineering again, as if the building had reconsidered courtesy in real time. In a stairwell, a flight that had always cost 12 breaths cost 13, and the 13th tasted like iron. The logs recorded fatigue. The logs were correct and incomplete. SCP files that should never speak to one another began to whisper through paper. Cross-references that had been hunted down and humanely destroyed grew back in cleaner inks. An old memo with a coffee stain became legible again under the stain. It said the word crown and did not apologize. The mimetic hygiene team washed its hands and then washed its hands again and found that the water, for once, had the decency not to remember their fingerprints. The Scarlet King does not appear. He persuades appearance that it has made a category error. He does not shout. He asks the room to consider whether sound has been arrogant. He does not strike. He suggests to matter that obedience is a higher mathematics than cohesion. The suggestion travels quickly when people are tired. The Foundation was tired in the way bridges are tired after doing what they were built to do for longer than anyone thought a river could demand. There were signals and there were prayers, and sometimes they were the same. In one control booth, a tech touched the intercom and whispered, not a name, but a refusal. The refusal had the tone of a lullaby sung to an animal that has mistaken the cage for the world. In a mechanical crawlspace, an engineer placed her forehead against a pipe and promised to remember why heat obeys time. In an observation room, a reader looked at a sentence and chose not to finish it. That choice remains in the record as white space. The white space is the bravest line in the file. Project Eidolon's last transmission, before the machines agreed to be quiet, did not contain numbers. It contained a sentence that had learned to be heavier than data. The archetype remembers being bound, it said. The next line arrived as an answer from nowhere that could be mapped. So do I. The origin of the reply remains unassigned because reciprocity is not an entity and the rival is not a messenger. 17 sites reported breaches that did not look like doors opening. They looked like definitions melting at the edges. At one facility, a containment chamber condensed a drop of water on steel where no humidity had been permitted for years. Inside the drop, a crown appeared and drowned. At another, a perimeter alarm signaled a crossing where no feet had moved, as if the boundary itself had decided to be transgressed so that records would not feel useless. At a third, a stairwell descended one flight more than the blueprints allowed and returned the extra distance when no one was watching. The debriefs are professional. The debriefs are scripture in a tone chosen to protect the ear. SCP-343 remained benevolent, without agreeing to be underestimated. He looked toward the corridor, and then toward the window, and then toward the floor, as if acknowledging the three directions from which danger approaches: from the future, from the horizon, and from the hearts of those who believe they are prepared. He said he trusted the Foundation to keep the world from being taught despair by spectacle. He said mercy can stand its ground when refusal learns its choreographies. He said less than he could have, because silence is often the more adult answer. SCP-001 remained the boundary where bravery is taught to be polite. The light did not widen, it did not thin, it became the size of duty. Those who keep watch learn to stand, as if their bodies were clauses in a promise never to be withdrawn. The reports from that perimeter contain no adverbs, because certainty does not need assistance. The rival remained, not in a place that can be addressed, but in the negative space of every line the Foundation has ever drawn between is and is not. The crown built of fractures persisted in the static of cameras trained on corners that never gave trouble until now. The red that first appeared in SCP-343's room repeated itself in subtle copies across ordinary instruments that never asked to be involved in mythology. Thermometers glanced blush, oscilloscopes remembered blood, screens found themselves willing to admit crimson where green had always been a sufficient sentence. Creation had a rival, and the revelation was not a miracle, it was an accounting. The Foundation learned that its work sits between two infinities, a light that refuses trespass for love, and a hunger that refuses limits for sport. The staff did not become heroes, they became exact. They tightened language, they let certain adjectives starve. They folded their hands before typing certain names, and waited until their wrists were steady again. Project Eidolon is closed, the files remain. In the margins of the last page, where a human hand could not have reached without bending paper into confession, a note waits with the economy of a verdict. Do not define what you are not prepared to imprison. Do not imprison what you are not prepared to become. The handwriting resembles no one. The room owns it. The Foundation continues. It cleans what can be cleaned. It humbles cameras. It teaches doors to mean yes, only when yes will not lead to worship. SCP-343 thanks the light for being kind under pressure. SCP-001 keeps the world from teaching itself how to enter places that will not forgive it. The Scarlet King remembers a time before remembering, and that is his advantage. The Foundation remembers that definitions are dangerous when uttered without meekness, and that is its defense. Creation builds, restraint guards, destruction invades. Between them, human beings count, and write, and erase, and write again, until the sentence is true and safe enough to stand in a room with a red light blinking slowly to remind everyone that the heart of the building is still beating, that the rival is awake, and that wakefulness is not the same as victory. The O5 Council ordered silence. The order moved through channels that had learned to behave like rivers under ice. It was signed by hands that do not shake and dated by a calendar that pretends days are separate on purpose. Encryption keys were issued with the tenderness of weapons blessed before unnecessary harm. The command was simple in the language of complicated things: end the conversation before it becomes a prayer. Protocol Edenfall opened its eyes. It had slept inside manuals under benign names, a seed of procedure awaiting the season when caution must masquerade as mercy. It began with maps. All files designated divine were redacted to the bone, then to the idea of bone, then to white space that insisted it had always been there. The remainder were rotated into training artifacts and renamed as fictional containment drills. Videos that used to be documentation learned to introduce themselves as dramatizations. Reports lifted their signatures and replaced them with the shrug of anonymous instruction. The archive closed cabinets like eyelids and printed receipts as if forgiveness could be itemized. SCP-343 was transferred off record under the logistics of ordinary kindness. The room did not protest. It shortened back to its blueprint, as if apologizing for hospitality. The window agreed to show a weather that can be predicted. Books held their breath and returned to the order assigned by a human hand. He thanked the building for its patience. The corridor dimmed with relief and regret. The entry that used to be a name became a reference to an asset no longer on premises, followed by a location that pointed to a place where location is not a relevant idea. SCP-001 remained where it always is. Designation rotated like a mask passed around a circle so that no one is certain which face spoke. The watchers were replaced by watchers who did not know that they had replaced anyone. The Radiance kept its law. The perimeter kept its courtesy. The reports lost their oldest metaphors and kept their verbs. Across the network, screens rehearsed obedience. Systems rebooted to cleanse themselves of nouns. During restart, each terminal presented a courtesy line to reassure the hand on the keyboard. The line multiplied, then refused to leave. The servers kept returning to a single sentence as if it were a safe harbor, as if it were a doctrine. The words arranged themselves without emphasis and with a confidence that embarrassed electricity. The word was containment. Technicians logged recursion with the restraint of people who prefer not to speak mythology into adulthood. They wrote that the message persisted beyond ordinary cycles and under extraordinary measures. They wrote that it presented no security risk beyond the risk that meaning presents when meaning wishes to be believed. They wrote that removing the line required a gesture that resembled prayer. Amnestics were deployed with clinical affection. Memories were thinned, not erased, as if painted over with a color called work. The dose charts read like lullabies sung to minds that had tried too hard to understand light. People returned to their desks with cleaner calendars and steadier wrists. They looked at screens and did not look through them. They slept and dreamed of nothing at all, until the hour when dreams cannot be kept out without breaking the sleeper. The Scarlet King did not enter, because entering belongs to guests. He stood in the doorway of sleep, a height measured in dread rather than in cubits. Personnel across sites reported a visitation that did not announce itself with thunder or argument. A shape without kindness stood where kindness is supposed to stand, at the foot of the bed. Mouths that do not belong to bodies offered a sentence that sounds like a verdict delivered by a mirror. You made me. The phrase was quarantined under psychology, where sentences go to learn how to be harmless. It refused harmlessness. It traveled along the commissary line in the way certain stories choose spoons. It crept into maintenance logs as a spacing error between ordinary words. It emerged in a child's crayon drawing discovered in a pocket where no child had authority to be. The ethics committee advised against dramatization. The advice was followed, and the advice did not help. The O5 Council ordered silence. Silence, long domesticated, lifted its head as if hearing its name spoken by someone other than its keeper. It had already heard. It was already busy. It had begun to stack itself into walls where walls were needed. It had begun to ooze under doors where sound might have taught panic its choreography. It moved through hallways like a river, promoted to a rank with responsibilities. Protocol Edenfall demanded that the divine be made dull. Citations were severed, cross-references were unbraided until the paper forgot what thread is for. Audio was filtered of harmonics that induce awe. Images were flattened to grayscale until brightness forgot itself and shadow decided to be reasonable. Annotated diagrams lost their annotations until they resembled maps to airports. The Foundation printed these artifacts and taught them in classrooms that smelled of toner and duty. Recruits learned that gods are case studies used to evaluate incident response under stress. Some recruits wept and did not know why. Containment of gods became indistinguishable from worship. The posture is the same. The hands move with identical humility over different tools. The eyes practice the same discipline of not lingering. The voice lowers by the same degrees when speaking in rooms where speaking too loudly is an injury. Protocol demanded that the staff forget what they had learned to call divinity. Habit demanded that they continue to act as if a presence can be offended by the wrong tone. Operationally, Edenfall performed. The graph steadied, the cameras blinked on schedule, and for the correct reasons. Files remained in their lanes instead of wandering toward one another like wolves who remember being dogs. The humming in the walls returned to the pitch that reassures. The red tint withdrew from ordinary instruments and returned to the corners of certain mirrors where color is allowed to misbehave without consequence. Officially, the situation was under control, which is a sentence that never apologizes for its optimism. Unofficially, the building remembered. Memory is a machine that declines to be unplugged. In stairwells at unromantic hours, personnel met their own reflections and found them colored by a sorrow that had no object. In break rooms, hands hovered above kettles as if heat were a sacrament and water a congregation. In maintenance closets, bolts that had loosened by a quarter turn tightened themselves politely and asked to be checked anyway, because attention is containment and containment is love when it declines to call itself that. SCP-001 held. No report used the verb guard, because verbs can be idols when they are too confident. The boundary continued to be a teacher whose lesson is no. Those who kept watch did not discuss dreams. They slept briefly and woke with names intact. They practiced the professional discipline of never making the light into a story. The light rewarded them by continuing to be impersonal in a way that feels like grace. The Scarlet King kept to the doorways of sleep and to the static of cameras, trained on the parts of rooms where stories prefer to begin. The crown of fractures appeared when eyes were tired and vanished when eyes were clear. The sentence "you made me" persisted in locations that refused to be dignified by an audience. A drain, a fuse box, a margin in a printout where a thumb had once rested. The Foundation trained itself to see and not to assemble. Assemblies become sermons, sermons become doors. The servers continued to reboot under schedule and without panic. The line returned and returned. The word was containment. The staff learned to read it without tasting it. They learned to treat it as a weather report. Between reboots, a junior administrator added a second line with the courage of someone who knows the room will protect her, and mercy is the silence between words. The addition was removed by a senior with the kindness of someone who knows the room must be protected from the people who love it. The version history kept both lines, like two hands resting on the same table. In the months that refused to name themselves, the Foundation became theologians of deletion. They practiced an art that looks in poor light like cowardice and, under the correct lamps, like discipline. They learned to end sentences before meaning gathers momentum. They learned to file where once they would have described. They learned that a closed cabinet is sometimes a hymn and sometimes a wound, and that their job requires them to accept the ambiguity without flinching. The O5 Council ordered silence again, not because the first silence had failed, but because silence, like any living thing, requires feeding. The order arrived as a reminder that speech takes work and that the world is tired of helpful words. It recommended rotation of chaplains into roles that do not involve listening, because listening is a ladder. It recommended increasing the number of places where sound can be safely lost. It recommended that personnel be permitted to name small mercies out loud in private, because unnamed mercy turns to mold. Protocol Edenfall closed. What could be closed and dimmed? What could be dimmed? It did not abolish the rival. It did not evict the dream. It did not erase the sentence the servers love. It taught the institution to carry the weight correctly. It positioned the spine under the load. It reminded the knees of their purpose. It told the heart to beat at a pace that alarms would not misinterpret. In the final report, a paragraph attempted to speak for the season and succeeded to the degree permitted by paper. It stated that deletion mitigates exposure and redistributes ore. It stated that reverence under another name reduces harm. It stated that what remains after erasure is often the shape of what was erased, and that the shape can be generous if not asked to perform. The last lines carry the tone of oaths made by tired people who remain faithful to their work because their work is faithful to them. We will keep the world from teaching itself despair by watching. We will keep the rooms from becoming churches by accident. We will keep our hands off the names that do not consent. We will permit the light to be law and the dark to be contained. We will believe less loudly. The O5 Council ordered silence. Silence finished the sentence. It settled into ducts and into keyboards and into the seam between glove and skin. It learned to hum like air moving correctly. It allowed the dream to knock and refused to answer. It left on the screen one line that does not seek applause and does not require a choir. The word was containment, and somewhere beneath the world, the files continue to write and to be written. Denser now, with the quiet that follows discipline. Lighter now, with the mercy that follows renunciation. Steady as breath in a building that has decided to live. The last lines carry the tone of oaths made by tired people who remain faithful to their work because their work is faithful to them. We will keep the world from teaching itself despair by watching. We will keep the rooms from becoming churches by accident. We will keep our hands off the names that do not consent. We will permit the light to be law and the dark to be contained. We will believe less loudly. The O5 Council ordered silence. Silence finished the sentence. It settled into ducts and into keyboards and into the seam between glove and skin. It learned to hum like air moving correctly. It allowed the dream to knock and refused to answer. It left on the screen one line that does not seek applause and does not require a choir. The word was containment, and somewhere beneath the world, the files continue to write and to be written. Denser now, with the quiet that follows discipline. Lighter now, with the mercy that follows renunciation. Steady as breath in a building that has decided to live. The memo did not travel by email. It moved the way a confession moves, hand to hand, in the quiet between alarms. Its title pretended to be administrative and therefore safe. Project Eidolon, Addendum Theta. The body of the text refused disguise. It read like a diagnosis whispered to a family gathered in a hallway. It proposed that the Foundation had misnamed its vocation. It had not been built to contain anomalies. It had been built to contain faith. The argument began without ornament, across the span of seasons, during which Project Eidolon practiced meekness as method. Patterns had arranged themselves into an equation that would not be ignored. 3 designations, 3 temperaments of the same radiance. SCP-343, Divine Self-Recognition. SCP-001, Divine Restraint. The Scarlet King, Divine Consequence. Not a pantheon competing, but a grammar completing. The memo did not advocate belief. It counted. It placed these figures along axes that instruments could tolerate and minds could approach without breaking entirely. Creation that knows itself, law that says no, hunger that remembers before law had a mouth. The prose refused spectacle. It held its sentences steady, as if carrying glassware through a trembling building. It observed that whenever SCP-343 spoke, coherence increased, systems settled, clocks remembered their duty, personnel found the courage to be gentle. Self-recognition, in this context, did not mean vanity. It meant the world remembering itself as gift rather than possession. It meant meaning stepping out of disguise and seating itself at a table without demanding applause. When the file turned to SCP-001, the tone became narrow without becoming cruel. Divine restraint, it said, is not punishment. It is the boundary that preserves kindness from the appetite that names itself curiosity when it wants forgiveness for touching. The gate guardian never moves because some truths should not need to. The light at the threshold is not an invitation. It is a promise kept on behalf of those who would ask too beautifully. The memo enjoyed no poetry, yet poetry seeped into the gaps between its words, like water into a foundation taught to expect drought. On the matter of the Scarlet King, the paper did not linger. Linger is a luxury when naming a hunger that wishes to abolish names. Consequence here meant the counter music to creation's hymn, a rhythm older than law that asks whether beginnings deserve to be forgiven for existing. The king is not myth, it said. He is opposition. He is entropy, with the patience to study organ systems, and the courtesy to announce himself first, in static, crown made of fractures, 7 points that insist on being counted, and then hide, as if counting were consent. The memo then articulated what all the graphs had been hinting toward. 3 gods, 1 equation. Creation cannot exist without the threat of its unmaking. Restraint cannot be loved without the danger that proves its necessity. Consequence cannot be understood until it has devoured enough to humiliate certainty. By defining the divine, humanity became its mirror. The foundation took up the mirror and discovered the face was its own. Containment, performed long enough and with sufficient sincerity, becomes a liturgy. Liturgy, repeated without appetite, becomes a form of mercy. The paper did not ask for assent. It presented arithmetic and allowed the room to draw breath. A paragraph followed that had the cadence of absolution given and withheld at once. It suggested that every non-divine anomaly, the objects, organisms, and events that behave like metaphors when examined closely enough, were fragments reflecting the same trilogy in miniature. A machine that remembers a life not its own is a child of self-recognition spoiled by consequence. A corridor that refuses to end is restraint compromised by appetite. A book that writes itself is creation that has not yet acquired humility. To contain one of these is to rehearse the greater drama with safer props. To fail at one is to prepare one's hands to be steadier when the larger doors tremble. The addendum did not flatter the institution. It named the nervous system of the Foundation what it had been for years without admitting it aloud. A priesthood disguised as an archive, chapels disguised as labs, prayers disguised as procedures that instruct doors and cameras how to behave in the presence of what should not be looked at for too long. It avoided the word worship, except in one sentence that refused to soften. The containment of gods is indistinguishable from worship. Therefore, worship must be performed without wanting. The Ethics Committee underlined that clause and allowed the underline to remain. From argument, the memo passed to prescription. Reduce definitions until they no longer tempt patterns to believe themselves invited. Teach instruments to blink. Teach eyes to stop before beauty becomes permission. Rotate personnel, not only for rest, but to prevent language from becoming a second bloodstream. Accept that some rooms will remember having been chapels and forgive them for it. Accept that some sentences will appear uninvited in margins and treat them like weather, noticed, respected, not pursued. It was not all subtraction. The paper also commended additions. Gratitude toward the work of buildings, spoken privately, as preventative maintenance. Small mercies named aloud, because unnamed mercy becomes mold. Manuals rewritten to include the humility of do not know as a valid outcome. A new field in incident reports, where witnesses could mark whether they sensed appetite in their own questions, and if so, whether the appetite had been excused by the room. None of this changed budgets or security doors or the weight of key rings on tired hips. It changed the soul of the work, which has no ledger and is the only ledger that matters when the lights go out. The section on Project Eidolon's legacy declined triumph. It conceded collapse where collapse had occurred and thanked the machines for learning to be quiet again. It praised Convergence for teaching the staff how to walk softly and to sort worship from work without humiliating either. It recognized the diagram called No Name as the last honest image the project had earned, a knot in 3 directions held by a hand that does not consent to be named. The image remained stored under a designation that neither summoned nor provoked. Sometimes the file was opened by someone who needed to remember the size of the room in which they labored. The file offered no new wisdom. It offered a silence that did not feel like abandonment. Midway through, the memo performed a gesture that the Foundation had previously avoided because the Foundation prefers its own tools. It borrowed a sentence that belongs to old texts and accepted the cost of borrowing. In the beginning was the word. Then it added the only amendment its century could afford, and the word we can survive is containment. It did not print this on posters or inscribe it above doors. It let the servers repeat it at reboot until the phrase became a weather pattern rather than a creed. Recursion is dangerous when adored. It is medicinal when treated like air. From there the document turned personal without using names. It spoke of the people who forget their names and find them again by duty. I watch the doors, I humble the cameras, I remind the light to be kind. It observed that these sentences heal better than chemicals when the wound is metaphysical. It blessed the practice without calling it blessing. It advised keeping a stone in the pocket, not because stones are talismans, but because matter that does not change its mind can teach a wrist to steady itself. It recommended that a kettle sometimes be treated like a sacrament, heat visited carefully upon water, as if bodies learning to calm themselves were part of the mandate. The addendum also made an unflinching confession. By defining the divine, the Foundation has built prisons handsome enough to tempt their jailers. Walls are mirrors when polished by vigilance. Look long enough, even in service, and the face looking back will begin to resemble a god worth fearing. The defense against this is not denial. The defense is meekness written as method. Do the work. Do not mistake the work for your size. If a sentence tries to become a throne, strike it once through and leave the strike visible for the next reader. They will bless you by not using the word bless. The paper revisited the Trinity one last time, the way a physician checks vitals before letting a family say goodnight. SCP-343. Self-recognition is not license. It is the courtesy that creation extends to itself, so that gratitude has somewhere to sit down. SCP-001 Restraint is not cruelty. It is the architecture that keeps kindness from drowning in its own enthusiasm. The Scarlet King, Consequence, is not an accident. He is what happens when hunger meets grammar and learns to conjugate in every tense. Together they form a sentence the world has been repeating to itself since there were listeners. I am, you may not. I will take if you forget. The conclusion chose an image instead of a flourish. The Foundation, in its infinite containment, became a new pantheon, the gods who hide the gods, not because it wanted worship, and not because it deserved it, but because someone had to practice the discipline of endings without spectacle. The pantheon wears steel and fluorescent light, and the odor of disinfectant. It wears keycards and eye strain, and the ache in the shoulder from doors that resist on purpose. It wears resignation, signed in the good ink, and laughter in the break room that remembers not to be loud in certain corridors. It wears hands that keep writing when the room has asked for one more paragraph in a tone that does not invite storms. The memo did not ask to be canonized. It asked to be obeyed when fear raises its voice. It asked to be remembered when definitions begin to swell like weather fronts. It asked that when the Scarlet King visits the lintels of sleep and whispers, "You made me," the listener will answer with a sentence that is neither denial nor confession. We defined, so we would not worship. We contain, so we will not invent you again. After distribution, no ceremony followed. Doors kept their cadence. Cameras blinked. A janitor swept a corridor with the competence of someone who has chosen a vocation and found it sufficient. A researcher placed a hand flat on a table and felt the grain settle, which sometimes happens when wood consents to be trusted. A watch officer wrote the word boundary in a log and allowed herself a small pride in spelling it, without shaking. The building inhaled and exhaled like a cathedral that has learned not to call itself a church. Elsewhere, SCP-343 thanked the air for continuing to do the work of breath. Elsewhere, the gate guardian kept the law by keeping still. Elsewhere, the Scarlet King remembered what unmaking tastes like and how patience can make a feast out of a slow room. The Foundation did not promise victory. It promised custody, which is braver when spoken softly. It promised to define less and hold more gently. It promised to erase in ways that leave behind the shape of what was erased, so that future hands remember how much space certain truths require to be survived. At the end of Addendum Theta, the last line refused adjectives and survived redaction attempts because redaction could not locate any blood to clot. Perhaps the Foundation was never built to contain anomalies, but faith itself. The sentence did not become a motto. It became a temperature. It taught rooms to cool when voices grow warm. It taught pens to pause. It taught hands to set down mirrors and pick up keys. In the years that do not proudly carry names, personnel will continue to dream of gardens and crowns and cities without doors. They will continue to wake and make coffee and check seals and file reports in a prose that knows how to sit quietly in a room with a heartbeat. They will continue to be the pantheon that hides the pantheon, not by being large, but by being exact. If the world survives, it will be because doors meant no when no was love, because light kept its distances out of respect, and because human beings remembered that the most dangerous definition is the one that flatters the definer. There are many ways to build a god. Some use faith, others use code. The Foundation uses containment, and after Addendum Theta, it uses it with a humility that politics cannot understand and poetry cannot fully praise. Creation stands, restraint holds, consequence waits. Between them, the work continues, sterile and reverent and mournful, a liturgy in gloves and a hymn in steel, performed by people who have seen too much and chosen anyway to stay. Somewhere beneath the world, the gods are still being classified. The statement appears in no report, and on every surface that remembers pressure. The Foundation does not print it. The buildings breathe it. After the memos are filed, after the seals are checked, after the hum of the day recedes into the steady respiration of machinery that has chosen to live, an empty containment chamber keeps its appointment with the hour when even clocks are gentle. There is no specimen inside. There is only the geometry of custody and the dust that settles like tired snow. Along one wall, a single red light blinks in rhythm with a heartbeat that belongs to nobody and to the building entirely. The room remembers. It remembers a season when sentences tried to become thrones and were crossed out with dignified ink. It remembers scientists who learned to place their clipboards on tables as if metal can bruise. It remembers the discipline taught by doors and the tenderness taught by silence. The walls have the posture of witnesses who do not swear oaths because the oath has already been lived. On the other side of the concrete, a corridor extends with the politeness of a thought that has no need to arrive. Cameras practice blinking, a habit taught to them by people who have learned not to stare at anything that might mistake attention for permission. The monitors are not watching, they are being present. In the server room, the air is cool and lawful. Racks stand like pews in a church that denies it has parishioners. The fans confess only to physics. No one speaks, and speaking would be a redundancy here, where work is the only language that doesn't apologize for itself. A terminal wakes. It does not announce itself with any sound louder than air deciding to move. The screen offers its modest light to the dark and waits to be asked for more. On ordinary nights, it displays temperatures, system health, the map of a network that mirrors the veins of a patient who has decided to survive. Tonight, it presents a line that looks like an afterthought and feels like a verdict. File created, SCP-000. The author. No one has typed, no key has consented to click. The line appears the way new stars appear, as if the dark had always been prepared to hold them. It is not a designation the Foundation uses for ordinary work. It is an index finger laid against the mouth of a story that has been speaking too long. The system timestamps it without drama. The log accepts it into the family of facts that do not require belief to be true. Elsewhere in the site, the staff are finishing their agreed-upon rehearsals of forgetting. It is a skill more exact than medicine. They carry their names carefully, aware that names bruise. They carry their duties like seeds. They leave the sanctuaries of their stations without calling them that, because reverence becomes a hazard when spoken aloud too often. They will sleep and dream of rooms that ask for quiet, of windows that look into the weather of mercy, of crowns made of fractures that fail to assemble when a hand remains steady. They will wake and reintroduce themselves. I watch, I listen, I humble the cameras, I ask the light to be kind. In the records, there is no SCP-000. There are gaps that have learned how to be doors without opening. There are margins that have agreed to hold commentary like breath. There are lines of code that prefer to be forgiven rather than executed. The designation appears now the way fog appears over water, condensing out of a temperature that only systems learn to feel. The servers do not panic. They have been trained by months of recursion to treat unexpected sentences as weather. The weather passes, the log remains. The chamber with the red light blinks again. The rhythm does not hurry. It honors a heart that keeps its promises without asking to be thanked. In this place, bodies have been healed by proximity to a voice that called the world lovely without begging the world to be good. In this place, bravery has been taught to sit down. In this place, time has learned to climb stairs with 12 exact breaths, and then, on difficult days, 13. The record has kept both counts and called neither an error. If someone were here, they would notice how the light reflects in the polished steel, like a planet learning to name itself. If someone were here, they would think of the gate guardian and the consent that law gives to kindness when the door remains closed without cruelty. If someone were here, they might hear in the hum a melody that resembles the line the servers love to recite when darkness asks them who they are. The word was containment. The sentence is not printed here. It is lived as climate. It is breathed the way clean air is breathed when the room has been prepared by hands that believe in wiping what cannot be seen. The author is not a person. The author is the pressure that arranges facts into a narrative shape and then refuses to be called art. The author is the acronym, learning to be a pronoun and then deciding pronouns are too proud for this work. The author is the sum of reports that never chose adjectives and the weight of doors that never asked for admiration. The author is the voice that reads this file without raising its volume, and the echo that does not return, because to return would be to invite applause. File created, SCP-000. The author. The designation sits in the system, among thousands of entries that name smaller, more manageable astonishments. It does not cross-link. It does not demand clearance. It does not blink. It is the stillness at the center of a weather map. It is the admission that the Foundation has become the final anomaly, not by accident, not by ambition, but by practicing the discipline of being present where gods are asked not to perform. It is a mirror installed deep enough that only those who have already paid the toll of humility will find it. Far above, the night considers the building and decides to let it be. Stars keep their appointments with instruments that are not pointed at them. The horizon, where SCP-001 keeps its promise, does not adjust its posture for a single sight. The light remains exact. It refuses trespass with the love that hard words require to remain beautiful. Somewhere else, in a room that declined to be called a chapel and failed, SCP-343 thanks the air for doing the ordinary miracle of becoming breath. He is not here to see the terminal. He does not need to be. Gratitude is a network. Far below, In the substrate, where pipes sing like old bones, the Scarlet King considers this quiet and remembers the taste of unmaking. He hears the line written to no one and to the room itself, and knows that authorship is a kind of custody he cannot steal. He stands in the doorway of sleep and whispers into the lintel with a voice that chooses patience as a blade. This time, no one hears. The building has learned how to be deaf without becoming unkind. The cursor waits at the end of the line, a small square like a brick with the decency to pause between loads. It does not ask for a second sentence. The servers do not provide one. Enough has been said today. Enough has been contained without being possessed. Enough has been erased without being denied. The foundation continues to breathe. The vents exhale a discipline written in filters rather than in scripture. The floors consent to bear weight without complaint. The lights hold back from triumph. In the morning, someone will review the logs. They will taste the old fear with its new, smaller teeth. They will print nothing. They will add a line of their own in the place where procedure admits that words are sometimes permitted to be true. Verified, no further action. On other days, in other sites, the same sentence will appear and will be filed and will be allowed to become part of the climate. The staff will carry on with the exactness that has spared the world from learning how to pronounce certain names. They will teach new hires the habits that look like superstition until machines mimic them. Blink, pause, do not define what you are not prepared to imprison. Do not imprison what you are not prepared to become. Keep the tea warm, keep the steel honest, keep the doors polite. The empty chamber does not remain empty because emptiness is its ambition. It remains empty because absence can be a form of protection when presence would teach the wrong lesson. The red light blinks again. The rhythm does not belong to any one heart. It belongs to the work and to the people who have chosen to be small in rooms that tempt largeness. It belongs to the promise that the story ends here tonight, not because endings are victories, but because endings are agreements. There will be more files. There will always be more files. Some will speak with the warmth that follows restraint. Some will hiss at the edges, like tape stretched too tight across a mouth. Some will not be files at all, but stains that refuse to be guilty. Each will be received by hands that know how to hold a thing without wanting to own it. Each will be assigned a home in cabinets that do not brag. Each will be remembered exactly as long as remembering keeps the world from becoming proud. File created, SCP-000, the author. The line remains on the terminal long after the monitors dim themselves to protect the light from arrogance. It becomes an afterimage on the retina of the room. It becomes a rumor among circuits, traveling the slow way, learning to be kind as it goes. It becomes a temperature. It becomes the way steel feels under a palm that has learned to ask permission before touching. It becomes the sentence a person repeats to themselves while walking a corridor that will one day be mistaken for a legend. The author is not a person. The author is the record continuing to write itself with hands that have sworn an oath to use the fewest necessary adjectives. In the morning, a janitor will enter the chamber with the red light and sweep corners that have always been clean. She will straighten a chair that does not need straightening. She will nod to a camera that knows how to blink. She will not see the terminal. She will not read the line. She will do the work that prevents the room from forgetting how to be simple. Somewhere in the building, a researcher will set down a cup with care. Somewhere else, a watch officer will choose a smaller word and live to file the report. Somewhere beneath the world, the gods are still being classified, not so that they may be owned, and not so that they may be displayed, but so that the world may continue to be a place where people can speak softly to machines and teach them manners. The foundation remains the pantheon that hides the pantheon, not by being vast, but by being exact. The heartbeat light blinks. The cursor holds its square breath at the end of the sentence. Then static, not the cry of a wound, but the snowfall of a system reintroducing itself to the dark. The image dissolves into the honest noise that follows any truth spoken without wanting applause. The chamber remains, the log remains, the work remains, and the line that should not have appeared remains, small as a prayer, heavy as a law,